Kayla, my daughter-in-law's sister, burst into the brunch with her phone in one hand and fury in her eyes. "Where's my piano?" she shouted. Everyone turned. My son Drew froze with his fork midair. His wife Emily gripped her mimosa glass tighter. I calmly dabbed the corner of my mouth with a napkin. "Oh," I said. "It was never yours to give." And outside, the Steinway my father gave me was already halfway down the block. On my terms this time. They gave away my hands, my heartbeat, my history. The smell of cinnamon-glazed bacon filled the entryway, warm and falsely inviting, like a scented candle masking smoke. Nora stepped inside her son's home with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her coat, still damp from the March drizzle outside, clung to her shoulders like an unshaken memory. She hadn't been in Drew's house since before Richard passed. Not because she was unwelcome, she wasn't, not overtly, but because grief had a way of rearranging time, and even her own reflection sometimes felt like a stranger. But today, brunch had been insisted upon. "Just casual," Emily had texted. "Family catch-up." Nora stepped over the threshold and paused instinctively by the parlor. She expected to hear silence, or perhaps the clatter of silverware in the kitchen. Instead, she heard nothing, an absence. She turned her head slowly, eyes scanning the room, and then she stopped breathing. The space was rearranged. The worn oriental rug was still there, but the back wall, where it always sat like a loyal witness, was empty. The Steinway. Gone. Her fingers curled slightly, almost automatically, the ghost of keys pressing back. She blinked, then blinked again. The light from the tall windows poured in like mockery over the bare floor. She took 2 steps forward. "Mom!" Drew's voice broke the air behind her. "You made it. Here, let me take your coat." Nora didn't turn. Her eyes were locked on the space where her father's piano used to live. Only when Emily entered behind Drew did Nora finally speak. "Where's the Steinway?" Drew glanced toward the empty wall like it had always been that way. "Oh, Kayla took it." Nora turned then, slowly. "Kayla?" Her voice was soft, nearly inaudible. Emily smiled as she moved past them with a tray of mimosas. "Yeah, my sister needed something nice for her place. She just got promoted, and we thought the parlor was feeling a little cramped anyway." Nora's stomach twisted, a hard, hot knot tightening just behind her ribs. Wasn't it tuned just before Christmas?" she asked. Drew shrugged, completely unbothered. "It was kind of sitting there. No one was really playing it anymore, Mom." Nora didn't respond. Because if she did, something inside her might have broken audibly. Instead, she walked quietly to the kitchen, taking the mimosa Emily offered her and replacing it with a cup of coffee she hadn't asked for. She needed the weight, the heat, something to grip. At the table, Kayla's name came up again. Emily mentioned how her sister was redoing her apartment in mid-century vintage chic, how the Steinway's legs had been refinished already to better match the shelving. Nora's throat went dry. In her mind, she saw herself at 16, legs trembling beneath the piano bench, her father's hand tapping strict time on her shoulder while she played Rachmaninoff's Second. The metronome clicked beside her like a ticking threat, but it was love too. Tough, disciplined, never quite said aloud, but it lived in those chords. That Steinway wasn't just furniture. It was where she learned to breathe, to ache, to express herself when her voice failed. They hadn't given away a piano. They had given away her. She didn't say much for the rest of brunch. Nodded where appropriate, smiled where required. Let Emily chatter about countertop finishes and Kayla's excellent taste. Let Drew ask about the condo and whether she'd thought of repainting the guest room. But when the dishes were cleared and the table wiped down, Nora sat quietly at the end, both hands around her now cold coffee cup. She looked across the table at Drew, her only son, the boy she gave up Juilliard for, and said flat and certain, "I'm going to need the address." Emily glanced up, half laughing. "Why? You want to visit the piano?" Nora met her eyes without blinking. "The number. I'm going to reclaim it. They didn't donate it. They downgraded it." The elevator groaned up to the 4th floor. Nora stood inside with chicken marsala pressed to her chest, her usual peace offering. In her coat pocket, a legal envelope. Inside it, her father's 1979 deed of gift. The hallway smelled like bleach and takeout. At apartment 4B, a wreath read, "Home is where the Prosecco is." Nora stared at it a moment before knocking. Kayla opened the door in a cream sweater and yoga pants. "Nora, what a surprise!" Nora handed her the dish. "Leftovers. Thought I'd drop something off." Inside, lavender-scented air and soft instrumental music greeted her, but Nora's focus was already fixed. There in the corner, partially hidden by a plant, the Steinway. Her Steinway, mail piled on top, one leg modified with a rubber stopper. She walked toward it, voice quiet. "You managed to fit it." "Oh, I know," Kayla replied with a little chuckle. "I was worried at first, but honestly, it really brings the room together, doesn't it?" Nora didn't answer. She ran her fingers gently along the keys. A soft plink emerged, flat, lifeless. She pressed another, out of tune. Her palm rested against the wood, feeling for a vibration that no longer came. "Was planning to sell it," Kayla said casually, flopping onto the couch and popping open a sparkling water. "But Emily was all, 'No, it's a family thing, so I figured I'd hold on to it.' It's kind of a vibe, honestly." Nora turned, her expression unreadable. "It was," she said, her voice smooth and clipped. "Still is." Kayla blinked at her, head tilted slightly as if she hadn't quite understood. Nora walked back toward the door with the same pace she had arrived, her eyes sweeping the room one last time. She didn't comment on the dust lining the music stand or the scratch on the left leg or the chipped ivory on middle C. She simply said, "Thank you for the water," though she hadn't taken any, and left. In the elevator, Nora reached into her purse and pulled out the slim black wallet she hadn't used in years. Tucked inside a side slot was a cream-colored card faded at the corners. Delaney Fine Art Logistics, discreet retrieval, secure transport, legacy handling with care. She stepped out into the afternoon sunlight, pulled her phone from her pocket, and dialed. A man answered on the second ring. "This is Delaney." Nora's voice was calm, collected, sharp enough to cut velvet. "I need to schedule a private extraction," she said. "The item was taken without consent." Delaney paused, then said, "Do you have proof of ownership?" Nora looked down at the envelope inside her coat. "I do." He gave away the only place I still felt like myself. The house was quiet, not peaceful, but worn from years of silence. Late sunlight stretched across the hardwood as Nora carried a canvas box into the living room. Inside, her old music journals. She hadn't opened them since Richard died, not even in the still hours after the funeral. She laid them on the coffee table, spiral-bound and leather-backed, pages scented with graphite and time. On the first page of the oldest, "Practice is the act of remembering who you are," written in her 18-year-old handwriting. Tucked inside was her Juilliard acceptance, folded beneath a rejection letter. She had gotten in. But days before, she'd learned she was pregnant with Drew. Richard had said, "We'll figure it out," and she'd understood what that meant. She never told anyone. She just closed the journal, raised a son, and let the music live in the Steinway she never stopped playing. Even when her voice went quiet, her hands remembered. She leaned back on the sofa, running a hand over her lap like she might be brushing invisible sheet music off her jeans. Then, slowly, as though by instinct, her fingers lifted into midair and began to move, phantom notes floating through the room. She played an old piece, one she'd written in the early 90s, something soft and minor and unresolved. She wasn't touching anything, but she could feel the weight of each key. Her pinky curled on a C-sharp. Her thumb struck a silent E. No sound filled the room, but her pulse shifted. Her shoulders softened. Tfat space at the piano bench had been hers. And Drew, her son, her blood, had handed it away without hesitation, without asking, without recognizing that for her, it hadn't just been furniture. It had been sanctuary. Rising from the sofa, she walked into Richard's study and knelt before the bottom filing cabinet. The metal handle resisted at first, like it remembered being opened with a different set of hands. She tugged gently, and the drawer gave way. Inside was a labeled folder. Estate and Marriage, Clark. She pulled it out, flipping carefully through bank documents and appraisals until her fingers found the yellowing certificate she'd remembered. Steinway and Sons, Model B, serial number 329847, date of purchase June 3, 1979, gifted by Charles Hammond, father of the bride, to Nora Eloise Hammond. Noted as separate property, non-marital asset. Her breath caught, but not out of surprise, out of confirmation. This wasn't just hers in spirit, it was hers in law. She took the paper and walked back to the dining table, unfolding her laptop with hands that no longer trembled. Opening her email, she began typing with calm precision. To info@delaneylogistics.com. Subject: piano retrieval, proof of ownership enclosed body. The item in question was removed from my possession without permission. Attached is the original certificate of ownership. Please prepare for immediate extraction. Warmly, Nora E. Clark. She clicked send, then leaned back in her chair, staring at the sent confirmation on the screen. Minutes later, a response appeared in her inbox. Subject: retrieval timeline. Options: discreet or public. The final line read, "We're prepared to act during your preferred window. Would you like us to wait for their next brunch?" They think revenge means rage. I prefer rehearsal. Nora had never slammed a door. She didn't scream, didn't throw things, didn't post vague Facebook statuses. Her retaliation had always come in the form of silence, slow precision, and a spreadsheet she didn't rush to share. She believed the best revenge wore gloves, not claws, and right now she was lacing hers up carefully. That Monday, she called the number listed on the certificate Delaney Logistics had confirmed. The restoration specialist, a woman named Evelyn Hart, answered on the second ring. "Steinway, serial 329847, Nora said after introducing herself. Model B, original purchase date 1979. There was a pause, then the soft click of keys. Evelyn's voice brightened. "Oof, that's a beauty. That serial dates to the mid-1950s. German craftsmanship before the factory retooled. That alone makes it rare. If it's in good structural shape, you've got a legacy piece on your hands." "It's in use," Nora said carefully. "I need a current appraisal without alerting the person currently in possession." Evelyn didn't miss a beat. "If you can verify the serial number and snap a few under-the-lid photos, I can work remotely. Do you still have access?" "I will," Nora said, her voice calm. Briefly. That Thursday, Nora stopped by Kayla's under the excuse of returning Emily's baking dish. She brought no casserole, only a smile and a hidden microfiber cloth. Kayla, in a face mask and slippers, waved her in. "Self-care Thursday!" While Kayla disappeared into the bathroom, Nora moved to the Steinway. She knelt, scarf draped low, and felt beneath the base pedal. The quiet corner, her father had called it. She pressed a GPS tag, small and silent, into place, hidden in the pedal cavity. Then she wiped gently above the serial number and snapped a photo. Kayla returned, still chatting. "All good?" "Perfect," Nora said with a polite smile. "Tell Emily I said thank you." By Saturday morning, Evelyn had emailed back. Attached was an annotated document with market comps, auction results, and detailed notes on Steinway legacy valuation. At the bottom, one line stood out in bold. "Recommendation: if retrieval is planned, complete before December 15th. Kayla's property has an open house listing scheduled for December 18th. Risks of unauthorized resale increase after that date." Nora stared at the line for several long minutes, her fingers tightening slowly on the edge of the table. That same afternoon, her phone buzzed. Drew. "Hey, just checking in. Are you coming to Thanksgiving? Emily's making pecan pie like Dad used to like." She let the message sit unread. Instead, she drove to the community center on Oak Ridge, signed in at the front desk, and took a seat at the upright Baldwin in the practice room. The keys were sticky in places, and the middle pedal was stiff, but it didn't matter. Her hands hovered for a beat before descending with quiet force. Scales, arpeggios, fragments of old compositions. She didn't rush. She let the music return on its own terms. Every note was a muscle regaining memory. Every chord was a vow kept. That evening, Evelyn called again, voice lower this time. One more thing, she said. I reviewed the logistics. If you want that piano back, you'll want it before December 15th. After that, it might not be where you think it is. They poured mimosas. I filed a chain of ownership complaint. The walkway to Drew and Emily's house was lined with tiny pumpkins and mums, perfect, curated, empty. Nora arrived with a cranberry tart and the calm of someone who already knew the ending, her coat neat, breath steady. Inside, laughter floated from the kitchen. Emily greeted her, flushed from Prosecco and turkey prep. Nora, you look amazing. Come in. Drew's slicing the ham. Kayla should be here any minute. Perfect, Nora said, hanging her coat precisely. She followed Emily into the kitchen, scanning the room. Everything was as Emily liked. White platters, cloth napkins, a playlist humming. Drew offered a distracted smile. Hey, Mom. Glad you made it. It always is before something shifts, she said, setting down the tart. No one asked what she meant. They gathered around the reclaimed wood table. Nora sat at the far end by the window, watching the still empty driveway. Kayla's running late. Shocker, Emily said, rolling her eyes with affectionate irritation. She said she had to run back home. Probably forgot her phone again. Nora stirred her coffee slowly, letting the spoon clink against the ceramic mug. The screen of her phone, resting silently face up beside her plate, blinked once. She glanced down without reacting. Delaney Logistics, item secured, no incident, transport en route to private storage. Nora set her spoon down, lifted her cup, and took a calm sip. Across the table, Drew was mid-rant about holiday traffic on I-95. Emily chimed in with a story about backsplash tile delays and a decorator who just doesn't understand winter whites. The room was filled with soft clatter and shallow ease. No one noticed that the clock on the wall had struck 11:03, the exact time the Steinway's wheels had left Kayla's apartment building. Created, cataloged, gone. 27 minutes later, the front door slammed open with a force that broke the rhythm of the entire house. Where's my piano? Kayla's voice, shrill and shaking, pierced through the dining room. She stormed in, face flushed with either rage or embarrassment. It was hard to tell which. Emily jumped to her feet. Kayla, what are you talking about? It's gone, Kayla screeched, waving her phone in the air. I just got back from brunch and it's not there. The whole corner's empty. The piano's gone. Drew stood too, eyes widening. Wait, what? Someone stole it? Kayla turned toward Nora like a heat-seeking missile. Did you do something? You were just there. The table fell into stunned silence. Nora, seated calmly at the end, folded her napkin and gently dabbed the corners of her mouth. She looked at Kayla without flinching. I arranged for it to be returned, she said quietly, evenly. It was never yours to give. Drew's jaw dropped. Mom, what the hell? You had it taken without telling us? Nora met his eyes with the practiced patience of someone who had raised him through every tantrum, every heartbreak, every moment of selfish adolescence dressed as adult logic. I didn't need to ask permission to retrieve what was mine, she said. You gave away something that belonged to me. I filed a claim. That's what grown-ups do when something is taken without consent. Kayla looked like she might cry. Emily sputtered, but it was just sitting there. You thought wrong, Nora said. Across the room, Drew's phone buzzed with a new email. He picked it up and read the subject line aloud, stunned. Chain of ownership acknowledgement. Return confirmation. Nora stood, adjusted her scarf, and walked her empty mug to the sink. As she rinsed the cup under hot water, Emily muttered behind her, This is going to tear the family apart. Nora didn't turn. She simply said, Then maybe it was never as whole as you thought. They accused me of stealing from a gift they gave away. By the next morning, Nora's phone was buzzing before sunrise. Not with calls, those would come later, but with the high-pitched digital chorus of a family group chat imploding in real time. The screen lit up over and over again, messages stacking like bricks against her calm. Emily. That was dramatic, Kayla. You blindsided everyone. Drew. I could have had someone come help you move it if you wanted it back. Why didn't you talk to us first? We thought we were doing something good for Kayla. Uncle Rob. Wait, what piano? Kayla. She took it. Like literally hired people during brunch and just took it. Emily. That was a family gesture. You made it petty. Drew. Seriously, Mom, that was cruel. Nora read each message slowly, sitting at her breakfast table with her hands wrapped around a warm cup of black coffee. Her eyes didn't twitch, her lips didn't move. The only shift was the slow curl of her index finger as she scrolled, one thumb swipe at a time. When they finally stopped coming, she stood up without a word and walked into the den, where her printer hummed to life under her command. A moment later, she placed a single-page PDF on her scanner and clicked Send to Email. Subject: Clarification regarding the Steinway body. Please find attached the legal document affirming sole ownership of the instrument in question, dated June 3rd, 1979, designated as non-marital property gifted directly to me by my father. The decision to reclaim it was not made lightly, but it was made legally. Best, Nora. She didn't address the group by name. She didn't respond to any single accusation. She simply hit send and turned her attention to something that mattered more. That afternoon, she began drafting a letter to the Historical Music Society, her fingers moving more smoothly now that the weight of justification had been removed. Dear Miss Langford, I am writing to inquire whether the Society accepts loaned historical instruments for educational preservation and scholarship exhibition. I possess a 1950s Steinway Model B, gifted in 1979, fully restored and recently appraised. It has been played in private recital but not professionally toured. Its provenance and maintenance records are complete. I believe it deserves a future that aligns with its past. Warmly, Nora E. Clark. She stared at the words for a long moment, then added one more line. Peace. I would like any dedication to reflect my father's name, Charles Hammond. The voicemail came just after 8 p.m., when the house was quiet again, and the day had begun to exhale. Drew's voice, strained and flat, came through the speaker. Mom, look, I'm just trying to understand what's going on. We thought we were honoring you in a way that made sense. You've been talking less lately, and we thought it would be nice if someone in the family got to enjoy the piano before anything happened. There was a pause long enough to suggest he expected that to mean something, that it would soften her. That legacy belonged to the living only after death. You're being selfish, he said finally, as if the line had just come to him. We were trying to honor your memory early. Click. Nora stared at the screen for 2 full seconds, then tapped delete. Not save, not reply, not forward to her lawyer for documentation, just delete. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full of choice. The phone rang again. Not Drew this time. This ringtone was different. Low, deliberate, professional. She answered. Nora Clark, she said simply. Her attorney's voice came through on the other end, calm but clipped. We've reviewed everything, and given the timing, I'd suggest we move forward with a proactive statement before they try to reframe it publicly. Nora reached for her glasses, slid them on, and nodded slowly. I'm ready, she said. Let's put it in writing. On her desk, the scanned deed still sat in the printer tray, ink fresh, edges still warm. Nora looked at it once, then reached for a pen and underlined one phrase: non-marital asset, sole ownership. Nora Eloise Hammond. They wanted an early goodbye. I gave them an early audit. The air was colder than usual for November, and inside her study, Nora could feel the draft from the old bay window nudging against her ankles. She tucked a wool throw around her legs and clicked open a new document on her laptop. The cursor blinked at the top of the page like a dare. She titled the file, Legacy Review, effective immediately. Below it, she wrote her name, date of birth, and the current year. Then she paused, not because she was uncertain. On the contrary, everything had become terrifyingly clear, but because she understood the weight of what she was about to do. She had never wanted to weaponize her will. But they From the old bay window, Nora tucked a wool throw around her legs and opened a new document. Legacy review effective immediately. She wrote her name, birth date, and paused, not from doubt, but from clarity. They had mistaken her silence for consent. That ended now. Her first call was to her estate attorney. I need to remove Drew as financial power of attorney, she said. Understood, Clara replied. And I want to reallocate 60% of my estate to the Clark Hammond Arts Foundation. That's a big shift, Clara noted. So was giving away my piano, Nora answered. Later, she pulled a leather folder from storage, old recital programs bearing her name. It had been 30 years since she played publicly, but the spark was back. She picked up the phone. Is your granddaughter still managing bookings at the community theater? She asked. She was no longer just revising a document. She was reclaiming a legacy, had taken her silence for permission. The first call she made was to her estate attorney, a woman named Clara Mulligan, who had always spoken to her like a peer rather than a number in a portfolio. I need to remove Drew as my financial power of attorney, Nora said. Her voice was calm, her tone dry. Effective today. Clara didn't sound surprised. Understood. Do you have a new designee in mind? I'll retain control for now, Nora said, until further notice. Also, I'd like to revise the structure of my will. What are we changing? Clara asked, clicking through something in the background. 60% of my estate is to be reallocated to the Clark Hammond Arts Foundation. Clara hesitated. That's a big shift from the family designation. Nora's voice didn't waver. So was giving away my piano. Later that day, she opened a dusty storage chest in her hall closet and pulled out a thin leather folder. Inside were programs from recitals past, yellowed, curled at the edges, some even torn. Her name was typed in a serif font across the bottom. Nora E. Hammond, classical pianist, 30 years. That's how long it had been since she'd played publicly. But a spark had returned to her fingers since she began practicing again at the community center. Something had come alive, a muscle memory that ran deeper than ligaments and tendons. It was cellular, intuitive. She picked up the phone and called a former colleague from her days volunteering at the Symphony Hall. Is your granddaughter still managing bookings at the community theater? She asked. She is, the woman replied. Why? I'm ready for a small recital, Nora said, her voice barely above a whisper. Something modest but public. There was a beat of silence. Then, you always were the best of us. The official announcement went out the next week. An Evening of Piano by Nora Hammond Clark, a legacy in sound. Half of the seats were already reserved before Nora had even finished polishing her set list. Meanwhile, the family group chat had gone oddly quiet until Emily broke the silence. Emily, so we're just cut out? Nora stared at the screen. The words looked harmless on their own, but she could feel the venom coiled behind the passive phrasing. Just cut out. As if the choice hadn't been earned. As if omission was a random act of cruelty instead of consequence. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she stood and walked to the piano bench. The Steinway, now safe, tuned, and resting in her private storage unit until it would be unveiled at the recital. She opened the bench, pulled out her marked copy of Debussy's Clair de Lune, and placed it on the stand. Then her fingers drifted back to the keys. This time there was no hesitation. The melody floated through her sunroom, soft and haunting, like it had been waiting for her all along. Back at the desk, her phone buzzed again. Emily, you could have talked to us. You didn't have to make it so final. Nora typed a reply, then deleted it, then typed it again. Nora, I made it this final because you treated something sacred like a placeholder. I have nothing more to explain. She didn't hit send. Not yet. Her inbox chimed with a subject line that made her blink twice. Local press inquiry. Feature on Nora Hammond Clark's return to the stage. She clicked it open and her hand trembled, but not from fear. From the feeling of being seen. The town woke to a quiet storm. Headline, Op-ed. How My Piano Was Stolen by the Living, a Letter from Pianist Nora Hammond Clark. In just 800 calm, cutting words, Nora told her story. A priceless Steinway gifted by her father, taken without consent, treated as decor. It was not furniture, she wrote, it was identity. By noon, it was shared by conductors, patrons, and arts advocates. Comments poured in, this is why we archive our own stories. Nora's letter didn't beg, it stood. And it hit. The next day, praise continued. Former students thanked her. A retired teacher offered support. And Kayla, furious, she posted, she's lying, my sister gave it to me. This is just senior spite. Nora saved the clip quietly, then moved on. They wanted her silent. She composed truth instead. Next came the text image posts, a blurry selfie of Kayla crying captioned, being bullied by someone I used to call family, followed by, don't believe everything you read. Some people know how to weaponize a piano. Within an hour, both posts were deleted, but not before Nora had taken high-resolution screenshots and emailed them to her attorney. She added the exact timestamps, device info, and visible usernames. Then she opened a fresh document and titled it, Social Retaliation Log, Clark Estate Conflict, Exhibit C. She didn't respond publicly. That wasn't her instrument. Instead, she printed a copy of the op-ed, placed it in an ivory envelope, and mailed it first class, no note, to the Historical Music Society, addressed directly to the Director of Curation. She added a short, handwritten postscript inside the flap. If you value story as much as sound, you'll know where this belongs. That afternoon, while practicing scales on the upright at the community center, her phone buzzed on the music stand. Delaney Fine Art Logistics. Subject, updated valuation notice. Her eyebrows lifted as she paused mid-arpeggio, wiping her fingers on a soft cloth before unlocking the screen. Body of email. Due to heightened media interest and increased visibility of your narrative, the appraised value of the 1950s Steinway Model B has risen 37%. This reflects both the instrument's intrinsic worth and its newly recognized cultural significance. New value estimate, $146,800. If desired, we can provide a formal letter of provenance for archival or insurance purposes. Delaney Logistics. Nora didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of the numbers settle like a final chord after years of unresolved tension. The piano hadn't just been returned to her. It had been seen. Just as she shut the lid on the keys, her phone buzzed again, this time from an unknown number. A message flashed on screen. We'd like to discuss a potential documentary. Would you be open to filming where it all happened? Legacy isn't inherited. It's declared. The auditorium at Greystone Conservatory smelled of varnish and reverence. Center stage stood the Steinway, Nora's Steinway, finally respected. A brass plaque read, "The Hammond Clark Steinway, in honor of women whose music was nearly silenced, donated by Nora Eloise Hammond, class of 1977. She'd chosen her maiden name, before marriage, motherhood, and being overlooked. As she approached the bench, something in her spine unknotted. The dean asked if she was ready to speak. I've been ready for decades, Nora replied. At the mic, she spoke clearly, calm. There was a time I thought my music would be discovered only after I was gone, that I'd had enough joy. But legacy isn't donation, it's defense. I didn't save this piano from theft. I rescued it from forgetting, and now I offer it to every girl told she must set music aside to survive. Applause rose, not loud but meaningful. The press release followed, photos of Nora beside the Steinway, quotes about her gift, the scholarship she funded, not listed, Drew, Emily, or anyone else who thought proximity equaled ownership. And then he arrived. Midway through the reception, just as guests began to mingle around the appetizer table and sip glasses of citrus-infused sparkling water, Drew walked in, wearing a suit too formal for the occasion, and a face that begged forgiveness but asked for recognition first. He didn't stop at the back. He didn't wait for a quiet moment. He walked right up to the stage and said, "Could I say a few words?" The room turned, confused. Nora blinked slowly. The dean looked to her. She gave no signal. Her silence was her answer. Drew stepped toward the podium anyway, gripping the edge like he needed it to stand. The audio tech, confused but cautious, let him speak. He cleared his throat. "I just wanted to acknowledge," he began, voice cracking with the strain of expectation. And then the mic cut off. The tech blinked at his panel, unsure if it was technical or intentional. Drew tapped the mic. Nothing. Nora remained seated in the front row, poised, silent, unmoved. Drew looked down at her, and for the first time in years, he saw the full portrait, not just of a mother, but of a woman who had outgrown waiting to be heard. As Nora rose from her seat to walk toward the reception table, a young girl from the conservatory stopped her. "My name's Joy," she said softly. "I want to play that piano one day." Nora smiled, then whispered, "You already will. You'd only notice it if you ever played it yourself." It was the softest imperfection, a faint metallic click just before the damper released. Unnoticeable to anyone admiring from across a parlor or snapping a photo for social media, but to someone who'd spent hours coaxing emotion from those keys, the flaw was unmistakable. The leftmost pedal on the Steinway had been slightly misaligned since Nora was 22. Her father once called it the piano's heartbeat glitch. A reminder, he said, that even masterpieces had scars. They never fixed it, not properly. It was too subtle to interfere, too familiar to remove, until now. Now, with the Steinway housed under the care of Greystone Conservatory and its legacy secured in scholarship, the conservator offered to restore it fully before its first formal student recital. Nora agreed, but with one condition. "I'd like to keep the original pedal," she said. "Just the one." The technician raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Sure, you're the donor. Want us to mount it for you?" She smiled. "Yes, but not on the bench. I want it displayed at home." 2 weeks later, the pedal arrived, set in a velvet-lined shadow box, gently polished with a plaque. Played beyond repair, still carried the sound. Nora placed it above her writing desk, beneath a photo of her 1981 debut. She touched the curve of the brass and exhaled. They never noticed the pedal was broken, because they never truly played. That evening she opened her journal and wrote, "Music was never theirs to inherit. They mistook proximity for permission. A piano belongs to the hands that speak through it." Then one last line, "And I never stopped speaking." She closed the book. No plans, no calls, just silence. It lasted until morning. Her phone rang. The name on the screen, Mara Levine, Legal Affairs. Nora dried her hands and answered, calm. "Mara, what brings you back?" "I'll keep it brief," Mara replied. Her voice was brisk, professional, but not unkind. "I'm calling because Emily has reached out to a local firm. They're claiming potential grounds for a defamation suit. Something about your op-ed and its intentional damage to her reputation?" Nora raised an eyebrow and walked to her desk, placing the call on speaker as she opened a drawer full of labeled folders, screenshots, notarized documents, timestamps. "Does she know that truth is a full defense?" Nora asked dryly. Mara chuckled once. "She's banking on public perception more than legal substance, but you should be prepared. They may try to paint your story as vindictive." Nora's hand grazed the base of the mounted pedal on her shelf. "If they want to make noise," she said, "they should have learned to play the right notes first." Mara hesitated, then added, "There's one more thing. A journalist from Modern Arts Weekly just reached out. They want to do a profile." Nora's heart gave a tiny jolt. "Of the piano?" she asked. "No," Mara said, "of you." They wanted silence. I gave them a symphony of receipts. The envelope was ivory with gold trim, the kind meant to look important. Nora opened it with the blunt side of her letter opener, careful not to crease the contents. Inside, 3 printed pages. Legal notice, barely veiled behind faux formal politeness. Plaintiff, Emily Monroe Clark. Allegation, defamation of character. Cause, emotional distress and reputational damage stemming from public narrative published in local media. Nora let out a breath, slow, deliberate. She'd expected this storm. What she hadn't expected was how calm she'd feel standing in it. She folded the pages neatly, placed them beside her mug of Darjeeling, and pulled open the drawer she'd labeled Proof, Legacy Defense. The symphony began with a spreadsheet. Dates, times, subjects, every instance in which Emily, Kayla, or Drew had referred to the piano as extra furniture, unwanted, or non-essential, email headers, screenshots, voicemails. Next came the scanned deed of gift, notarized and dated 1979, the certified valuation letter from Delaney, the Instagram posts, deleted but archived, where Kayla called her a bitter senior who cares more about objects than people. Then came the op-ed itself, crisp, respectful, and fact-checked line by line. And the cherry on top, an audio recording, clear as a bell. I mean, it's not like she was using it. Emily's voice scoffed in a casual brunch recording Nora's neighbor had captured during an accidental crossover event at the cafe. Nora hit play and listened again. The line dripped with condescension. No malice needed. It was dismissal dressed in honey. She smiled. Let's go to court. The hearing was swift. Emily arrived in a beige sheath dress, flanked by a high-priced but ill-prepared attorney. Nora, dressed in charcoal wool and pearl earrings, came with Clara Mulligan and a thumb drive of exhibits. The judge, an older woman with wire-rimmed glasses and a voice that didn't need amplification, took less than 20 minutes to make her stance clear. There's no evidence of defamation, the judge said, closing the file. Only a woman telling her story. Dismissed. Nora didn't look back. She didn't need to. 2 weeks later, Modern Arts Weekly ran a feature. Played Beyond Repair, an excerpt from Nora Hammond Clark's living memoir. It recounted her childhood at the Steinway, her Juilliard acceptance, the sacrifices, and the quiet erasure that followed. This wasn't revenge, she wrote. It was restoration. The story went viral. Forums, legacy groups, even Reddit. Aita for taking back the piano my son gave away. Top comment. Not only are you NTA, Nora, you're my hero. Then the call came. Miss I. Clark, this is Victoria Ryland from Ink and String Press. We read your piece. We want the full story. Nora looked out at the rain. I think I'm ready. That night, she opened her journal and wrote, Chapter 1, The Note They Didn't Hear, and began. They practiced entitlement. I practiced truth. The publishing contract was thick. Legal pages stacked and tabbed, every clause highlighted in yellow or blue. Nora sat at her dining table, the Steinway's old pedal gleaming faintly from its display shelf across the room. She didn't hesitate. She clicked the fountain pen open and signed her name with the steadiness of someone who had nothing left to prove, only something to preserve. Nora Eloise Hammond Clark. The Keys They Couldn't Keep, a memoir of music, silence, and taking back what's mine. Ink and String Press, Spring 2025. After decades of composing in the margins of receipts and between grocery lists, Nora finally had a deadline. Real editors, a cover designer, a voice. But it wasn't the advance check or the industry praise that moved her. It was what she did the morning after the contract arrived. She drove to the Oakwood Community Center, a squat brick building with peeling paint and a piano that looked like it hadn't been tuned since the Clinton administration. She walked into the multi-purpose room with her sleeves rolled up and her heart wide open. 8 folding chairs, 3 chipped music stands, 2 girls chewing gum, 1 boy tapping beats with pencils against a metal chair. Beginner piano? One of them asked skeptically. Nora smiled. Beginner everything, she replied. Twice a week she taught chords and posture and rhythm. She didn't just give them scales, she gave them stories. She told them about how hands remember when hearts try to forget, about how mistakes in music aren't endings, they're invitations to keep playing. One student, Javier, brought in an old Casio keyboard from his cousin's garage. It was missing the B-flat key. Nora adjusted the practice sheet so every piece could be transposed to avoid it. You can still play a full song without one note, she told him. But when that note comes back, you'll know how much it matters. Her days filled with slow crescendos, practice room laughter, smudged sheet music, the soft thunk of piano lids closing after a lesson well done. But one evening, as she packed her bag, someone knocked on the doorway. She looked up. It took her a moment, but then she recognized the tall man with salt-streaked hair and a cello case slung over his back. "Will?" she asked, blinking. "Will Forrester? Conservatory ensemble partner?" He hadn't changed so much as deepened, smile lines carving warmth into his face, eyes still gentle behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I saw your excerpt in Modern Arts Weekly," he said, stepping into the room. "Then the feature, then the letter about the scholarship. I kept meaning to reach out. I guess I'm about 25 years late." Nora set her satchel down slowly. "Well," she said, brushing hair from her cheek, "if you're here for a duet, the piano's in better shape than I am." He grinned. "Maybe, but I remember your timing was always better than mine." That weekend, Nora stood outside her old conservatory staff entrance, waiting to meet the school archivist for a donation drop-off. In her arms was a leather-bound copy of her sheet music journals, her early compositions, revised by candlelight when Drew was a baby. As she waited, her phone buzzed with a notification from the State Commission for the Arts. She blinked. Subject: Legacy Recognition Nomination. Confirm submission. The body was short and formal. "You've been nominated for the 2025 Legacy in Arts and Education Award. Please verify biography and image for public announcement." She read the line twice. Then again, someone had submitted her name. She looked around the courtyard. Barren trees, a fountain still frozen from last week's cold snap. And then it hit her. Will. Or maybe one of the students. Or someone who had seen what could no longer be silenced. Just as she tapped confirm, another message came in. This one from the production team at her publisher. "We've locked your book cover. You'll want to see this." The file attachment opened to a minimalist black and white design, The Keys They Couldn't Keep by Nora Hammond Clark. A single Steinway key floated mid-page, cracked at the stem but shining. "They thought legacy was inherited. I made it earned." Morning sunlight hit the framed deed in Nora's hallway. A simple walnut frame, her father's signature beneath the words, "Gift of Personal Property, Steinway Model B, serial hash 374661. Not decor, but a receipt. Of ownership, of history. That afternoon, she emailed Drew a scan. No subject, no message. 10 minutes later, he replied, "So this is it? You're cutting me out for good?" She didn't respond. She printed it, filed it under emotional leverage attempts, and made coffee. A week later, the press release went out. Nora Hammond Clark to receive Living Legacy honor for lifetime contribution to arts and education. A rare award for the living. The closing line read, "We commend you not just for what you preserved, but for what you refused to let be erased." She told no one, not even Will, who now played weekly duets with her at the community center. They didn't speak of lost years. They just played. 3 days before the ceremony, a thin envelope arrived. No return address. Inside, one ticket, row E, seat 12. The handwriting was Drew's. Too neat, overcompensating. That night, she sat at her desk, the ticket resting like a challenge beside her tea. Will called, voice warm through the receiver. "You ready for Saturday?" "As ready as I'll ever be," she said, trying to keep her tone even. He hesitated. "You okay?" "I'm aware," she answered, eyes fixed on the ticket. "Aware of what's past and what still expects an encore?" He didn't press further, just said, "I'll see you on stage." 2 mornings later, the award letter arrived. Not the invitation, not the press kit, the letter, heavy paper, gold leaf crest. Inside, a single paragraph. "The Living Legacy Committee has voted unanimously to confer upon you an honor traditionally awarded posthumously. In doing so, we recognize your life not as a closed chapter, but as an ongoing masterpiece. Please prepare a 5-minute performance or statement. The audience will be listening." Nora read it twice. Her hands trembled, not from nerves, but from the shock of validation that came too late for so long. Her music hadn't been lost in a forgotten bench. It hadn't been reduced to background sound in someone else's living room. It was alive, and the world at last was listening. That evening, she walked to the shelf and gently took down the pedal, the original damaged, dulled piece of brass that had once been discarded by repairmen, forgotten by decorators, and ignored by family. She wrapped it in velvet and placed it in her performance bag. Legacy wasn't about being preserved, it was about being known, and Nora had finally decided to play every note of her life out loud. As she zipped up her bag, another envelope slid through the mail slot. This one was thicker, handwritten again. She opened it to find a letter and a photo. Drew standing outside Greystone holding a bouquet of peonies. Scrawled on the bottom, "For after your performance, if you'll let me stay that long." They never asked what I needed. Now they ask if they can come. The concert hall lights dimmed, cloaking the rows of silk scarves, tailored suits, and gray heads nodding in polite anticipation. The low hum of conversation faded into the kind of silence that buzzed in the ears, the kind that made every breath feel like a decision. Nora stood just off stage, clutching the edge of the velvet curtain, breath tight in her chest. She had performed before decades ago, but this time felt heavier, not because of the critics or the press, not even because of the award she'd be handed afterward, because of the seat in row E, seat 12, and the man sitting in it, Drew. He had come, as promised, peonies resting on the floor beside his polished shoes, eyes fixed on the empty bench in front of the Steinway. She'd refused to speak with him backstage, told the staff to hold any guests until the end. She wasn't ready to forgive, and he wasn't ready to understand, but she was ready to play. The MC stepped up. "Please welcome Nora Hammond Clark, musician, author, and this year's Living Legacy Award recipient." Applause, warm, cautious. Nora entered the light, eyes not on the crowd but the Steinway, the piano that had carried generations, grief, and finally, justice. She began. Her father's version of Clair de Lune played with her own quiet edits. The notes were clear, unshaken. She danced through memory and muscle, even where the old pedal once failed. The room fell still, no coughs, no whispers, just reverence. As the final note faded, she rested her hands, then stood. The ovation swelled, people rising with it, clapping, crying, breath held in chests that suddenly remembered how much music could mean. Nora didn't glance at row E. She didn't need to. Backstage, she slipped into her gray wool coat, bypassing the reception line entirely. She told Will to meet her later. There would be no speech, no mingling, no post-performance pleasantries, just the sound of her heels clicking against the marble floor, just the knowledge that she'd said everything she needed to through music. As she reached the rear exit, she heard her name. Nora. She turned. Drew stood beneath a brass sconce holding the bouquet. He looked smaller somehow, like a man realizing the piano wasn't the only thing he had no right to claim. "I just wanted to say," he started. She held up her hand. Not harsh, not cruel, just final. "Not here," she said softly. He nodded. "Will there be another chance?" She looked him in the eye, saw the boy she once raised, the man she no longer owed. "I don't know," she replied, and then she walked past him. Outside, her driver handed her a small envelope left at the reception table. No return name. Inside, a folded card. "Your students would like to perform with you if you'll have us." Beneath it, a sheet of beginner-friendly sheet music titled Legacy in Four Hands. This wasn't revenge, it was restoration. The house was still when Nora returned. Not empty, just whole. She hung her coat, pausing in the entryway as sunlight caught two photos. Her father guiding her hands on piano keys, Drew with birthday cake on his face. The second didn't sting anymore. She'd learned the difference between forgiveness and forfeit. She could forgive without returning what was broken. In the den, the Steinway was gone, donated, engraved, honored. But the bench remained. She sat. It creaked, familiar. She opened the lid and placed the recital program inside. Legacy Performance Series, Nora Hammond Clark. The keys they couldn't keep. Her name, full, declared. Later that week, at the conservatory's satellite campus, redbuds blooming outside, her students waited backstage, nervous, upright, growing into their confidence. Javier handed her a paper. I transposed the second part so Chloe can keep up, he whispered. She smiled, voice warm. That's what a musician does. They adjust. The Steinway had been delivered 3 days prior, tuned, polished, revered. The audience was small, just parents, teachers, local patrons, and one notable absence. Drew hadn't come, at least not that she could see. Nora sat at the far end of the bench, leaving space for each student to join her, one by one, for the duet arrangement they'd titled Legacy in Four Hands. Each child touched the keys differently, some with hesitation, some with force, but every note landed, every mistake was recovered. Every silence was followed by music. By the time the final chord rang out, something had changed. Not in the world, but in her. Back home that evening, Nora poured herself a glass of red wine and stepped onto the back patio. The sky was streaked with the last orange light of spring, and the breeze carried the smell of earth, warmed and ready for renewal. She pulled a journal from the side table and flipped to the final page. The words were already written, penned the night before the recital. They gave away the keys, but I still knew the song. She added one more sentence, slow and steady. It wasn't revenge. It was remembering what I'd always been. Inside, the house hummed with quiet. She passed the framed deed on the hallway wall, gave it a small tap as she walked by, and turned off the lights, room by room. Everything was in its place, not restored to what it once was, but transformed into something untouchable. Final shot. At the conservatory, the camera pans over the Steinway, now the centerpiece of the new Women's Legacy Room. A brass plaque reads, "Donated in honor of Nora Hammond Clark, composer, teacher, survivor." 8 children sit in a semicircle around it, fingers poised. They begin playing Clair de Lune. 4 hands at a time, 1 note at a time, together. I didn't get back what was stolen. I made it priceless.